November 2nd, 1944, over-occupied Czechoslovakia, a P-51 begins to die. A flak burst rips the oil system, the Merlin coughs, and the prop slows as smoke streaks the canopy. The pilot rides the glide, watches the map line to friendly territory stretch too far, and pulls the handle. This is the story of the Mustang driver who escaped by stealing a German fighter and flying it home. If that sounds impossible, buckle in and subscribe, because this plays out at ground level, inside a cockpit nobody trained him to touch. Stay with me and feel the choices tighten with every mile. Lieutenant Bruce W. Carr flew with the USAAF's 354th Fighter Group, 353rd Fighter Squadron, under the 9th Air Force. The unit pushed deep over enemy territory that fall, hunting targets and escorting heavy bombers. Carr's luck ran out over Czechoslovakia when flak punched through his Mustang's lifelines and gravity claimed the rest. The parachute opened late enough to hurt. Carr hit hard, rolled, and felt an ankle complain as he cut himself free from the harness. He gathered the silk, buried it, and knew the nearest friendlies were days away. Survival odds for a downed pilot in occupied country were not generous. Behind the lines with no radio, no food, and only a pistol, most men were caught within a day or two. Carr calculated quickly and chose the unorthodox path. He went toward German territory rather than away, aiming to step outside predictable sweeps. Moving north put him into search patterns from the wrong angle. Patrols expected a westward run, so he crossed their grain. Forests offered cover, but also traps of sound and light. He kept to the trees, stayed off roads, and used streams as quiet guides. Travel at night limited silhouettes against snow-dulled fields and reduced the chance of being spotted by farmers or patrols. He counted steps between hedgerows, froze for minutes when a dog barked, and waited for wind to cover the rustle of brush. Each dawn, he dug himself into leaf mold and lay still until light faded again. Heat was a ration he could not buy. Late autumn in Central Europe bled warmth out of boots and fingers, and cold made every pause a test of will. He drank from ditches and streams, judged water by smell, and fought cramps with movement. Food never appeared. Villages were traps, and barns had eyes, so hunger grew from complaint to a dull hammer. By the third day, every decision ran through a fog of low blood sugar and grit in his joints. By the fourth day, surrender became a plan, not a failure. The Luftwaffe took Allied pilots as prisoners of war. With the war turning, odds of living through a camp looked better than odds of surviving another night exposed. He needed a Luftwaffe uniform nearby, and that meant an airfield. German rear bases ran on routine when front lines were far away. Fuel Bowsers followed loops, ground crews followed checklists, and familiarity made perimeters soft where risk felt low. Carr understood that routine could be a weapon if he moved slowly enough to become part of it. Observation came first. From a tree line, he watched a nearby Luftwaffe field through breaks in branches, measuring the tempo. Patrol out, patrol in, refuel, test run, throttle check, covers on, covers off. He learned the sounds of the place, the whine of starters, the cough of radials, the chatter of toolboxes being dragged across stones. If surrender looked safer at dawn, a better idea could overwash it at dusk. Ground crews sometimes left a fighter ready to scramble with full tanks when the clock pressed and procedures lagged. In that hour between maintenance and midnight, the gap appeared. The cockpit of any fighter shared a vocabulary. Throttles lived under the left hand, trim wheels along the seat, gear and flaps at the edges, and critical switches collected in clusters. Even without German, Carr understood the grammar. A guarded switch meant danger. Twin toggles meant ignition. A fat lever routed fuel. He knew the logic of starting a warplane. Open the fuel, wake the electrics, set the mixture rich enough to catch, crack the throttle, prime, then spin the engine until compression and spark marry. On Allied aircraft, he had done it hundreds of times. The German panel just changed the labels and the sequence of hands. German airfields depended on layered security, but not on constant vigilance everywhere at once. Sentries watched gates and choke points. No one watched a shadow move along the backside of a hangar if it looked like another shadow. Night erased rank and insignia, and the right posture, slow, deliberate, never dashing, stole identity through confidence. Once inside a cockpit, failure would become loud. A mistaken lever could flood cylinders or cut fuel. A wrong switch could turn the starter dead or light the panel in a way that drew a guard. Carr needed to make the engine catch on the first or second try, not the fifth. The WWII carried its own set of traps. Canopy latches worked differently. Oxygen and radio lived under unfamiliar covers, and German warning lights flashed with meanings he had to guess. He would seat himself, strap in, and let muscle memory from another aircraft find cousins in this one. Takeoff would then be its own war. Tailwheel fighter, high torque, narrow stance, and a short run across a field lined by people who expected to own any airplane painted in their colors. Fast hands would be the only authentication he could offer. Once airborne, altitude would be death. Radar and flak loved clean horizons, so the hedgeline offered cover in noise and shape. A river could point west, railway tracks threaded across borders, and church steeples wrote the geography he needed. Navigation at that height demanded constant choice. Low meant wires, windmills, and terrain, but it also meant certainty that silhouettes above him stayed out of sight. He could not call anyone. He could only place himself where probability favored a ghost. Friendly territory would not recognize the shape of a German fighter in the morning light. American gunners had standing orders to shoot at enemy outlines. A perfect hedge hop would starve them of time to decide. The only authentication left would be to arrive too fast to be stopped, and then stop on his own terms. Landing posed the hardest problem. Unknown systems, unfamiliar gear sequences, and warning lights in another language made a clean recovery unlikely. The belly of an aircraft could be an ally if the field stayed clear, the speed stayed measured, and the pilot lifted the nose at the last breath before contact. At the end of that chain, people with rifles would decide intent in a heartbeat. Hands needed to be visible, canopy open, and posture broadcast surrender to friendlies who did not expect him. Every second from touchdown to the first spoken word would be another test of judgment. At 6,000 feet over Czechoslovakia, Silk blooms and the Mustang falls away like a burned leaf. A gust swings him, the ground comes up fast, and a frozen field smacks the breath out of his chest. Pain flashes from his ankle as he crawls, stuffing the parachute into the earth and smoothing the soil with raw hands. Night slides over the trees. He limps north under the canopy, counting his steps and tasting iron in his mouth from thirst. Patrol voices drift through the woods. A crack of a branch freezes him in place, and a beam of light sweeps past his boot by inches. Moonlight turns frost to glittering hazards. He unhooks his pistol, then pushes it back, knowing a shot would end the game. Instead, he waits on his belly as a truck grinds along a road and tail lights turn the trunks to red bars. By the second night, hunger gnaws through concentration. He drinks from a shallow stream, cold water stinging his teeth, and stares at the same constellation he once used to navigate home after training flights. The same stars look indifferent here. He keeps moving because stillness feels like surrender to sleep. Dawn gray finds him curled in leaf litter, holding still while footsteps and dogs search in a broad arc. Breath slows until his chest barely moves, and wet leaves stick to his cheek. A boot rests against a root not 3 feet from his nose. When it lifts, he counts to 60 before blinking. Midday brings him to a ridgeline overlooking a broad flatland. Beyond it, a faint glint betrays glass and aluminum. The low hum of engines riding a crosswind carries through the trees. An airfield sits there like a pulse in the land. He watches the airfield find its rhythm. A flight takes off, another lands, and trucks coil and uncoil hoses. Mechanics run hands along wings, tap gauges, and step back while engines cough and smooth out under test. Surrender hangs just within reach. He imagines stepping from the trees with palms out, shouting his rank in English and betting his life on the professionalism of the Luftwaffe. Then a FW-190 is pushed to the edge of the tarmac, its prop windmilling on a ground run, its tanks filled, its cowl panels closed. Nightfall decides for him. Clouds slide over the moon, and the airfield loses sharpness, becoming a patchwork of exhaust heat and shadow. The last crew removes a ladder, talks, and walks away, leaving the fighter glistening under dew. Across the open ground, each step threatens to write a new story if a sentry yawns in the wrong direction. He moves without hurry, hugging the black seam between hangar and night, until the aircraft towers over him like a metal animal at rest. The skin is cold to the touch as he pulls himself up the wing root. The canopy latch resists, then gives with a metallic click that echoes too loudly in his ears. He slides in, legs ducking under the panel, and settles into a seat that smells of leather, oil, and gun cleaner. Fingers go to work without permission, tracing a map he doesn't know but recognizes anyway. Toggle switches line up beneath his left hand, some guarded, some bare. Twin magneto switches sit where they always do, twins that want to be on together. A fat lever labeled in German sits under his palm, braided lines leading away to a tank. Fuel must flow, so he opens it. Priming comes next. He finds a plunger and moves it until resistance bites, then sets the throttle a finger's width forward from idle. The starter control hides behind more text he cannot read. Time slows until his eyes catch the relationship between components. This must be it. He cages the thought that a wrong try will bring a guard with a flashlight. One breath, and he engages the starter. The motor spins, coughs, catches a blade, and then the engine barks to life like a dog suddenly awake. Vibration climbs through the airframe, and the canopy fogs at the edges from his breath. Gauges settle into needles with meaning. Oil pressure rises. Temperature begins its long creep, and the prop wash pushes a wave across a puddle beneath the wing. He eases the throttle and feels the aircraft tug against chocks that are no longer there. Taxiing becomes a lesson in posture. He S-turns to see over the nose, watching for movement, and keeps the tail wagging just enough to look like a man doing what he always does. A figure appears far down the line, hesitates, and turns away. The runway is a darker strip of grass with ruts waiting to grab a wheel. He lines up, holds the brakes long enough to breathe twice, then releases and feeds in power as if coaxing a temperamental horse. Torque tries to drag him off to one side. He dances on the rudder to keep straight. Rotation arrives as a gentle lift that threatens to stall if he hesitates. He commits, pressures the stick forward to build speed, and the ground unhooks from the wheels. Distance expands beneath him until the field becomes a lit stamp on the night. Now the hedge line becomes a lifeline. He lowers the nose until fences whip past so fast they blur into a gray belt. The engine settles into a hard, insistent rhythm. He listens to its story, tuning for any change that signals a problem. Navigation is dead reckoning at treetop height. A river slips under the nose, leading toward the west like a silver thread. He takes it, trading straight-line distance for cover and coherence, and keeps his altitude low enough to make church towers look like cliffs. Searchlights probe the higher skies, unaware that the threat they seek hums just above wagon level. Farmhouses rush past in the peripheral vision, fields stitched together into an endless quilt, and the horizon begins to color toward morning. The boundary between enemy and friend crawls closer on the map in his head. First ground fire arrives with a line of tracers that climb and fall behind him. He jinks left, then right, throws the aircraft into a zigzag that costs speed, but buys time. Another string reaches up from a distant road, and he buries the nose for a second, skimming a hedgerow that slaps at the wingtip. He cannot talk to anyone. No radio codes match, no call signs will carry, and any broadcast in German would invite a dozen guns. Silence is the only safe language now. The border to Allied territory does not announce itself. A column of smoke from a shelled rail yard, a different angle in the trenches, and roadblocks with unfamiliar patterns offer clues. He trusts those cues and keeps going, knowing that ironically the danger just increased. Allied gunners see a German fighter where there is a German fighter. The first flak puffs are black, close, and timed for altitude he is not using. He crouches inside himself as a burst detonates ahead, and he drives through the residue, holding low and hoping the shooters lose their solution before the second correction. Farm roads and drainage ditches turn into arrows pointing toward a familiar cluster of hangars. The silhouette of a field appears, but nobody there expects this shape on their approach. He overflies the trees, and the perimeter shakes as men sprint to guns. A few waggles of the wing offer the only greeting he dares. The cockpit warns him in a language he cannot read. He reaches for the gear lever and pulls, waits for a change in sound or feel, and hears nothing but wind. A second try gives the same answer. No change, no clunk, no lowering drag. Belly landing becomes the only option. He lines up beside the runway, on the grass, where softer ground will shave speed, and balances the fighter on cushions of air as long as physics allows. The last second, he lifts the nose, chops the throttle, and commits. Contact with Earth is a long tear through turf. The noise becomes a howl. The prop shatters and the airframe bucks, but the slide stays straight. He rides it out with his hands off the controls, counting the heartbeats until stillness. Silence arrives like a slap. He rips the canopy open, lifts both hands high, and waits while a circle of helmets closes with rifles leveled. Breath fogs in the cold. He shouts his name and unit through the roar left over in his ears. Faces change when voices finally make sense. Ground crew look at each other. A sergeant lowers his weapon first, and someone calls for an officer. A Mustang pilot in a jeep skids to a stop, stares at the captured fighter, and then at the man inside it with disbelief that curdles into recognition. Medical checks happen right there on the grass. Fingers run over his ankle, a blanket lands on his shoulders, and the first question is whether he is hurt or insane. He laughs once, short and sharp, because both answers feel true. Someone throws him a cigarette as if it connects him back to the squadron. The smoke tastes like winter and engine oil. Behind him, mechanics already circle the FW-190 with the quick hands of men who understand rare opportunities. Gun crews at the field took him at gunpoint, searched him, and then walked him straight to an operations tent for debriefing while a flight surgeon checked the ankle. Records vary on the exact field. What followed mattered for more than a story told over mugs. One pilot who should have been lost returned to duty. The unit's morale jumped, and the audacity became a sharpened edge for the 354th's legend. Security around aircraft tightened along the front, and crews on both sides were reminded that routine breeds openings. Gunners and controllers also deepened identification drills for the uncomfortable possibility of friendly pilots arriving in enemy shapes. Know the fundamentals under pressure. They turn a cockpit you've never seen into a machine you can use. When the rules fail, a clear logic of risk and timing becomes the map. For more war stories driven by choices that cut close and clean, subscribe.